Welcome to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.
What is the Bennington Triangle? What were the Butterfly People of Joplin? What's going on with reincarnation?
Hello, and welcome to the 912th edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. I am Ben, and we are coming to you live from WOON, AM, and FM radio in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, on the Paranormal Radio app from TalkStream Live, and on YouTube, and via TuneIn.com. I'm Ben, and those diverse questions came from my co-host, partner in Paranormal Adventures, and Dad, Paul. And today we bring you an open line show with a brand new guest co-host. Well, relatively brand new. It's his second
new
time.
And not new. Yes. Peter William Shelley makes his debut as an official guest co-host today. Peter has been known to our regular listeners for years as the mysterious Peter from South America, who sent in excellent questions every week. Peter's true identity was revealed as he made a surprise appearance on our 900th show on June 20th of this year. A native of San Jose, California, Peter has had an active interest in UFOs and the paranormal since the 1960s. While still a child in 1969, he had a UFO experience that convinced him that the phenomenon is absolutely real. After high school, he attended film school with the intention of becoming a producer. In the late 1970s, he moved to Los Angeles and worked in cartoon animation as an artist. Ultimately, he was employed at Hanna-Barbera Studios and worked on such TV series as the Godzilla Power Hour and Jana of the Jungle. I hope I'm pronouncing that correct. An avid listener to shows and podcasts on UFOs and the paranormal, he became dissatisfied with the quality of many shows. And evidently, this did not include Behind the Paranormal, and Peter has been an enthusiastic listener for years, contributing deep and probing questions on a weekly basis. In 2020, he started his own podcast on YouTube, Shadowy Spectrums. Peter has found a niche interviewing researchers from outside the United States. He lives in Bogota, Colombia, where he has taught English for over 10 years.
So Peter Shelley, welcome back to Behind the Paranormal.
Well, thank you very much, Paul and Ben. I appreciate the honor. I'm looking forward to this discussion.
Very good. Yeah, I will look forward to many fun shows in the future.
But first, I have to say thank you for your work on the Godzilla Power Hour, which I actually have watched. And as I grew up, one of the staples of my childhood was Godzilla, of all things, because my father, being the eccentric man that he is, loved kaiju, which, for those who are not familiar, is the Japanese art of giant monsters that attack things and stand up for the rights of all children everywhere. It's my dad told me that. I was like, you got to be kidding. I was like, that's so cool. So I'm a little bit starstruck, and I apologize.
Oh, that's nice. Okay. Now, there is one technical glitch we have to explain today. Ben, I don't understand it, so tell people about the video.
So unfortunately, for those of you who do so much enjoy watching us on YouTube, there's an issue with some of the equipment, so we will not be streaming on YouTube today. If you happen to be watching on WOON's website, that's owenworldwide.com. You can view us on there, and unfortunately, to our guest here, he will not be able to see us, but we can see him, which is probably disconcerting.
So, Peter, behave yourself.
So, just know that we're watching.
Yes. So the audio, however, will be recorded and will be posted on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, and the usual suspects.
Correct.
So, all right. So let us proceed. Now we have a number of Facebook contributions here. One is from Izzy in Connecticut. I think she's written in the last few shows. Good question.
Yes. So, writing to us from Connecticut, Izzy writes, I just read your book, Bigfoot, Mothman, and Monsters You've Never Heard of. And I found the Butterfly People of Joplin really interesting because, as you say, I've never heard of it. It is a beautiful story that really doesn't fit the quote-unquote monsters categories. Do you have any other examples of creatures like this? What do you think they are?
Well, interesting question. Just to give people background on the Joplin thing, on May 22nd, 2011, so just about 10 years ago, an EF5 tornado pretty much devastated the small city of Joplin, Missouri. And within a day or two, stories began to emerge from children who had been caught in the storm, that they had seen sort of giant butterfly people, sort of humanoids with butterfly, type colored wings, who protected them in sometimes almost impossible situations, and protected their adult guardians who happened to be with them. This became an inspiration for everyone in the town, and an artist was hired to do a mural on one of the buildings in town, and the children contributed drawings to add to this, and it was included in the sort of the whole saga of the tornado ordeal that the area went through. What's interesting about this is that several adults also reported, who were with children, also reported seeing this. A number of people, of course, were killed, so whoever was protected was pretty lucky. It reminds me, however, of some stories that I heard from the Chernobyl nuclear disaster in the 1980s, that there were supposedly sort of angels who told people to get out first and all this sort of thing. There is also the sort of ironic tradition of the Mothman, who supposedly will predict disasters, and on occasion has not been nasty and scary, but has helped people, apparently, according to them. Not very often, but the butterfly sort of style kind of reminds me of the Mothman stories. And one does hear of, in natural disasters, storms, forest fires, things of this kind, occasional stories of this kind, because they're very hard to verify. So, Ben, Peter, have you heard of, for lack of a better term, guardian angel kind of beings helping folks out in situations like this?
After you, Peter.
Well, I did try to do a little bit of study, a tiny bit on this incident, and it's now I did look at some video of the tornado itself, and I don't see how anything could fly during that tornado. It was so fierce. It's a great story. I think Spielberg maybe has commissioned a script about it.
Has he?
But I would be interested in knowing how this story started exactly. I'm not really clear on that. It's kind of it's kind of nice to hear about cryptids who aren't sinister and doing bad things. It's kind of a different kind of story, but I don't know. What do you think, Ben?
So I guess my first thought is I think how we did, I like the idea that was put forth, which was monsters, quote unquote, and that's a really interesting word to use, right? Because I think there's not a lot of time spent on what that means for something to be a monster, right? So when you think of monster, you think of something that's pushed on the outside of civilization. Like if you look at Norse mythology, it's like, whatever exists beyond the ends of the world, beyond the mountains that, hold everything in. Or in some Middle Eastern cultures, it's whatever's in the wilderness, in the deserts, or something that's just outside of normal society, something that exists on the fringes, right? You don't see Bigfoot running down the street in the middle of downtown Woonsocket.
Now and then.
Oh, occasionally. It could be some guy who's really, really hairy running around. You never know. But typically, all this stuff kind of occurs on the fringes of society. Now, we can look at that as, well, yeah, obviously something like that couldn't exist within a city if you're being like a strict, scientific materialist. Or you can view it in a symbolic sense, which is these are things that exist on the outside of the normal, quote unquote. So if we examine it from that sense, monsters aren't by nature, bad. Monsters are sort of these things that exist. They have their own motives. I heard this really interesting thing. I was talking to you about this yesterday, Dad. That the scholar Snorri Sturluson, who spent a lot of time researching the Norse epics and stuff, and most of our knowledge of them today are because of him. And he makes a really interesting point that giants in Norse mythology specifically aren't necessarily considered like these giant creatures. They're just kind of a race, and they mostly symbolize chaos, and that's kind of like their thing. They're not by nature bad. They're just chaotic. And there are even points where the Norse gods they sort of hang out with these people. And there's all sorts of these really interesting stories and folklore of monsters doing good things. The first person that comes to mind is the early Christian Saint Christopher, who is, if you ever see an icon of him, you'll see that he has the head of a dog, and you see him carrying the baby Christ. And there's not a ton known about him, but the story, the pietistic story goes that he was a giant that existed in somewhere in modern day Turkey, and there was a river, and basically people would pay him to pick them up and move them to the other side of the river, and that was what he did. And there's a really interesting little lecture I heard about him by this guy named Jonathan Pajot, who did a really interesting analysis of monsters doing good things, and it was really fascinating because the story goes that there was a baby that was on the side of the river, and him being a giant by nature, he's supposed to be bad, i.e. like Goliath and all those other figures. He picked up the baby, but he didn't have the strength because the baby was just incredibly heavy for some reason. But he managed to get the baby across, and it turned out that it was like, oh, it's baby Jesus or whatever. So it was like, the monster can be good too. And it's like, you hear all sorts of stuff like that too, in little bits of folklore, nursery rhymes and stuff like that. So monsters by nature don't have to be bad.
Well, I perhaps can maybe wrap this topic up by citing personal experience. Now, we can't verify the Butterfly People of Joplin, though one can see culturally how the label is attached, particularly by children. All children know what a butterfly is. Okay, and you have multicolored wings, some kind of butterfly. So I get that. But and I've told this story many times on the air. 1979 was on a military exercise in the St. Elias Mountains of Yukon in Canada, and a survival exercise. And at one point, this is 20th century military technology. It wasn't like today. And we had, and essentially I was caught in a small avalanche, and I was under 8 feet of snow. The pressure was unbearable. I knew I was going to die. Interestingly, my body was panicking, but my mind was calm. So, and all of a sudden, everybody else, the other guys out there jumping up and down, trying to dig me out. And all of a sudden, I felt my right hand go warm, and something pulled me up out of that snow mound or whatever. As I say, it's about 8 feet. And I could breathe again, and the guys just sort of stared. And I never understood. I felt great positive energy. I felt love. And I can't explain it rationally, whatever that means, quote unquote, but it happened to me. And it saved my life. So as far as, nobody's going to tell me they're guardian angels or some such critters who help us. So
well, we work with the data we have.
We do, yeah, and that's all I can say. But I think the stories from Joplin are very beautiful. We researched them for our book, as the listener pointed out. But the artist was kind of cooperative and not cooperative. He wouldn't give us permission to run a picture of the mural on the side of the building. But, I've heard from other sources that the children stick to the story to this day. And, of course, a lot of them are not children anymore. So that's what we've heard, anyway. Okay. Okay, Peter, any further comment on that subject before we go on?
Well, in your personal experience, did the other soldiers see anything?
They didn't see anything other than me buried under the snow.
But when you came out, did they see anything else?
They saw me come out, that's it. Nobody saw any sort of creature or a spirit, if you will, or anything of that kind. It was just, the cold and the wind. And January in Yukon, of course, was dark. And so But, they had lights and, we were well equipped for that environment, but they didn't see anything. All I know is that hand got warm and out I was pulled. And I was pulled. By who or what, I don't know.
Yeah, that's amazing. And then the butterfly people have never been seen since the 2011 tornado.
Well, not correct? There. But it depends who you talk to. Sometimes there have been reports, but of course that'll happen once it's joined the local folklore, if you will. People will see it again. It's much like would it be the Slender Man or these internet phenomena that really people made it up and then all of a sudden people started seeing it. So are we dealing with thought forms here or survival instinct taken to the 10th power or what? Deserves further research. Peter, you look like you want to say something.
Well, yeah. The only other thought I had was there's a lot of I think there's some stories from World War II and some other World War I maybe where soldiers have had some kind of encounter with an benevolent being that helped them survive a situation. This is an interesting area. And then, of course, I also, my mind flashed to the photographs in the 19th century, I think, that Arthur Conan Doyle thought were valid. These were showing like a miniature butterfly people, but it proved to be a hoax.
Yeah. When photography comes along, I'm not aware of any photographs of these, but photography, things are so easily faked, it's very important to be very skeptical about photographs.
But there are no photos of the butterfly people.
Not that I'm aware of. So, all right, well, let's move on. We have Kumar from Kent, England.
Okie dokie.
Bit of a long question, but a good one.
Hey, we can take it in paragraphs. So Kumar writes to us. Having been brought up in a tradition that believes in reincarnation, I'm always interested in what you have to say on the subject. You have asked the question if reincarnation is true, why are there so many ghosts? Having read your books and being familiar with your very plausible theories about the paranormal being explained by the multiverse theory, I know that question about reincarnation is somewhat tongue-in-cheek because you don't accept ghosts in the traditional way either. Fair enough.
Yeah.
In Hindu belief, reincarnation can allow for ghosts. I actually didn't know that. If a person dies with many frustrated wishes and hopes, the belief is that the soul will wander around for an indefinite time with no body. So I suppose you can have reincarnation and ghosts at the same time. In Hindu belief, it seems to me Christians believe too, the body is like a piece of clothing. The soul, which is the real essence, can be put on and taken off. Thank you for your great work and show. It is refreshing to hear so many new ideas in the paranormal field. Well, I guess it's not really a question so much as it is a statement. Which is interesting.
No, it's very interesting though. But thank you, Kumar, for writing in. He's written in before. The notion that of the dualism that we see in this reminds me of Zoroastrianism, which tremendously influenced Christianity. I'm not sure of its influence on Hinduism though. But nevertheless,
they were all kind of in the same area.
Yeah, I kind of considered that approach from Hinduism to, the notion that you don't always necessarily be reincarnate. You might go, blundering around as a quote unquote spirit, and then, until your wishes are fulfilled. I mean, talk about frustrating. How do you do that? In that state. So I don't know, but I get his point. But we don't accept ghosts as spirits. Necessarily, we could be wrong. We believe it's intersect points with various parallel worlds that where the person in question never died or whatever, and I think that's better physics. So I don't know. I'll throw that right into Peter's lap to see what you think of that issue.
Well, I'm thinking of your previous interview with Dev. And who was talking about alien abduction, and she had hypnotic regression, which it came out during that process that she had some kind of other life, possibly in another time. And her interpretation was that it was evidence of reincarnation. This is a whole nother topic. I think it's very interesting that in more than one, in multiple cases, many cases maybe, people who are trying to investigate alien abduction experiences, alleged alien abduction, also it comes out that they have experienced some other kind of life, possibly in another time. So I don't have any. I'm more open on the subject of reincarnation now. My mother was actually obsessed with the reincarnation. But what turned me off was that it was always some historic person. In the present day, living a mundane life, but previously Abraham Lincoln or Napoleon or some super famous person, but in this life a nobody. To me, that didn't make sense.
That's a good point, actually.
Well, as we said, they never seem to be, Sven, the reindeer herder from Lapland. I mean, they're all, they're some king or queen. I'm sorry, Peter, we had more to add?
I'm since she passed away, I read some books about reincarnation. I'm more open to the topic. I don't have any good answers on that, but there was an interesting book I remember reading. Taylor Caldwell was the author, a woman, and she had this memories of being a surgeon, supposedly a female surgeon in ancient Greece, doing brain surgery and describing in detail the brain operations.
That did happen. There's evidence of all sorts of surgery. There's evidence of root canal work in Syria roughly 9,000 years ago. She may have been right.
Yeah, it was very interesting, but I don't have any definite conclusions about reincarnation.
Ben, any thoughts?
I do. I have thoughts. Thoughts are a thing, although they are not mine. So I think it's really interesting how, I don't know, I've always had a problem with dualism. I think that the idea, there's two sort of ways to approach it, right? So it's like, my body is a skin machine, it's made of meat, it does calculations, whatever, and then my soul kind of inhabits it and runs it kind of like the little alien in Men in Black. And so from there, it's when my meat machine decays and my soul is released, whatever, done. Who cares about that piece of crap? Let's move forward to the future into a new meat machine. And my ultimate thing is, I don't know. I never bought it. I was never into it. I don't know if it's a cultural thing. It didn't make sense to me, because it's like, what's the point of having a body in the first place if that's the case, right? What's the point of all of this even existing if it's like, well, it doesn't really matter because you're going to die and everything's going to decay, and we're all just learning things to bring back to some uber consciousness, and it's like, if it's an uber consciousness, wouldn't know everything anyway. And so now we're getting to this weird space where we're like, all right, are we uber Platonists where I take my body for a walk instead of going for a walk? Are we in this place where, there's that prime mover that exists somewhere out there that's too busy contemplating itself and doesn't care about us, but we have to rise above and be perfect and become prime movers ourselves? It's a really weird space, and I don't like that there's any separation, because my personal experience, because we're all experiencing a subjective experience of an objective reality, is that my body is more than just my fingers and arms and appendages that are, flailing around. It's so much more than that. I think how we view things is it's so minuscule, and we view it from the lens of our own self-actualization. And at this point, it's like there's so much more to it. There's so many more portions of just, I guess we'll take the soul, right? Which is just an amalgam of like 5 different Greek words that got kind of distilled into one. Kind of like love was 7 different words that was distilled into one.
In English, yeah.
Right. So it's kind of like we're in this weird space where it's like, how can we exist if it's just, okay, well, as soon as I die, then all this is just meaningless. And then what's the point of doing anything? Because then you just become a nihilist at that point. And so we're at this place in postmodernism where we're trying to forget everything and just say whatever to all of it. But postmodernism can't get around this big wall, and that big wall is called nihilism. We can't get around that. So it's either we look backwards to everything we forgot, or we just say whatever to all of it and just go full Nietzsche. And so I have a big problem with dualism in that regard, because the natural next conclusion is nihilism, in my opinion.
All right, well, we can continue the duel of the idealists after our break here, and I'll have one thing to say to sum that up. Anyway, you're listening to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno on WOON 1240 AM and 99.5 FM in New England's beautiful Blackstone Valley with our wonderful guest co-host today, Peter Shelley, and we'll be right back.
The night is alive. Join us and take a walk on the weird side when you tune in to The Kingdom of Nye, hosted by Heather Wade, the finest in late night talk. Listen live free weeknights starting at 9 p.m. Pacific Time at thekingdomofnye.com, talkstreamlive.com, and the Paranormal Radio app. Wanna take a ride?
Local and live at 99.5 FM.
Okay, welcome back to Behind the Paranormal on WON Radio, AM and FM. And well, just before we leave the issue of reincarnation, I think that one situation that could change the entire, whether it's dualist or monist approach to the philosophy of it, is something that that hit me after I read Einstein's Special Theory of Relativity, his book Relativity, 1952, was that the implication being very strongly made that there is no past, there is no future, it's all simultaneous, and we only experience it via our consciousness as past to future. It has no objective reality. And very often we've had people on the show, such as I'm thinking of Professor Amit Goswami, the renowned physicist and mystic from the Hindu tradition, who pretty much agreed with us on these things. And I think it's just an issue. If there's no past, how can you have past lives? Rather, it seems to us that there would be parallel lives, and you could be, and probably are, since all possibilities and outcomes do exist somewhere in the multiverse, if you believe the theory. You could be a famous, king or queen or scientist or composer, or you could be, some poor drudge cleaning the castle floor. I mean, that's pretty much seems how it works. So reincarnation is a fascinating and open issue. And before we leave the subject, Judaism had a reincarnation tradition. Now, I never knew that till I studied Hebrew, and I get into these long, fascinating conversations with Rabbi Silverman in Providence, and we would talk about this. And Judaism had a tradition of reincarnation. It's not prominent anymore, but it was for a while. Early Christianity had groups that believed in reincarnation. I think primarily of Origen, not the beginning, but the guy.
Yeah.
Early Christian theologian who was later considered a heretic, of course. And to
be fair, he kind of got a bum rap. Got a lot of stuff attributed to him that just.
Well, that's what your Uncle Bob thought. Your Uncle Bob was a priest who did his doctoral dissertation on Origen.
There are some scholars who think that a lot of stuff that was said was attributed to him that he just didn't say.
Well, you go that far back. I mean, you can't even get quotes straight today.
No.
Never mind,
Just look at the news.
It's 1,800 years ago. So in any case, reincarnation is an open question, perhaps an open book, but who knows? Anyway. All right, so let's move on to another questioner here. We have Joseph from Danville, New Hampshire, and we were in New Hampshire yesterday.
Okie dokie. And so Joseph writes to us. it looks like there's a couple of things, so we'll just we'll take it a little bit at a time. And so the first portion is, just thought I'd bring forward to you a place called Bennington Triangle in Vermont. It has almost the same reputation as the Bridgewater Triangle in Massachusetts. The Bennington Triangle has stories of disappearing people, and to this day there is no reason for their disappearances. What is your thought on this?
Well, I dare say, I don't want to put Peter on the spot, but he's a sort of fellow who is very systematic and careful in his research. Have you looked at this question at all, Peter? The Bennington Triangle?
Well, to prepare for this show,
Aha.
Yeah. But I'm familiar with the Bridgewater Triangle. I've looked at that. Yeah, this is pretty interesting, but it seems like there's a very short window of mainly the phenomena there is the disappearances. I think 5 people disappeared, but it was between 1945 and 1950. Why hasn't the phenomena continued? Why such a short window of time? But I did look at it, and yeah, we need a lot more information. But the disappearance that I thought was the most interesting was James Tedford, who was on a bus. He was a veteran. He was on the way to visit relatives, and just before arriving in Bennington, he apparently was noticed as being missing. His seat was vacant. His bus schedule was on his seat. His luggage was still on the bus, but he was nowhere to be found. I thought that was the most interesting or mysterious of the 5 people that disappeared, because the other ones were they were outside. Maybe you could imagine a bear or a mountain lion being responsible, but I doubt if there was a bear or a mountain lion in the bus. So we can't.
You never know in Vermont.
That's a good point.
So yeah, but why did it end in 1950? Why don't we have more mysterious happenings in Bennington? Yeah, the whole topic of people disappearing is very interesting to me. As a child, I was very intrigued with the Bermuda Triangle. Read a lot about that. So, yeah, the topic of mysterious disappearances, I love that topic. I would like to see, the law enforcement report on some of these cases. Right? We need more information.
Well, it's funny. In the 70s, I was when I was studying for the priesthood. Before I went into the Orthodox seminary, I was Roman Catholic seminary, and I would have served in Vermont had I been ordained a Roman Catholic priest, because that was the diocese I was studying for. So I spent a lot of time there. We have a lot of family in Vermont. The Enos are major figures there, I guess, or used to be. And so I would hear stories from the Bennington area. Now Bennington is in southern Vermont. It's not up really in the mountains like some of the other places, and it's easily accessible, as is the Bridgewater Triangle, kind of on the other side of us here in New England. I did hear stories in the 70s of some of the disappearances, because people knew I was into this, and there were reports too of giant birds seen, things that you really couldn't put your finger on. In the sense, and it's relatively well populated for Vermont. Vermont, I believe, has more forest, per square mile or whatever it is than most states, for its size. So I was aware of it. There were UFO sightings. I think if you look back through MUFON reports in the 70s, there was pretty healthy set of sightings there. Things that might, should we look into it, sort of label it as a flap area, but we have not. That is not on our official list of flap areas. But we do have family and listeners around there who do kind of keep an eye on the place for us. One of whom is a doctor, a very dear friend of ours. So I think that we are aware of it. Thank you for writing in about it, and we just. we'll continue to monitor what we can monitor from there.
Fair enough.
But there's no way as dramatic as some of the other areas, particularly Pennsylvania.
No, it seems like there's a lot of what's the word? Wow, I just
spooky stuff.
I guess, yeah, we'll go with that. There's spooky stuff, but just not super documented. You know what I mean?
Well, that's it. I don't know. We haven't really researched at the point where we've gathered data and other things that we do in other areas.
Although
there's only so many hours in the day.
Well, according to Joseph over here, there are more groups that are investigating.
Yeah.
And there are other sort of there's stuff going on. I personally haven't heard about it until very recently. So it's I don't know, maybe.
Well, the question is, how do you research? I mean, it should be done in a systematic manner. The disciplined thinking that that should be applied to scientific matters should also be applied to this, insofar as it's possible. Perhaps that's pipe dream, but I mean, some people go in with no experience in data gathering or any sort of scientific thinking, can gather information and it'll all be hearsay and really have very little value. So I don't know. Perhaps we'll tackle that area as we go.
Indeed, maybe on a vacation or perhaps a weekend.
Well, it's not that far away, so
or go up for lunch one day. Who knows?
Yeah, like we did yesterday. Okay.
Okay, so we'll move on to the next question, which is Linda from Taos, New Mexico. And Linda writes to us, I hear a lot about Bigfoot and UFOs being seen together or near each other, including on your show, but not so much here in the Southwest. So what is the connection, if any? Is Bigfoot an alien, a ghost, or are aliens giant, hairy, and smelly, or are they close but no cigar?
Well, that's an interesting point. The geographical characteristics of many paranormal phenomena have drawn our interest in the past. One wonders if there are cultural aspects. In other words, people from Botswana usually don't see leprechauns, although they're their own versions of it. So the matter of Bigfoot and UFOs is one that has come to our attention very, very prominently in the Pennsylvania Triangle case. We have been researching that since 2016. It's one of our newer cases. And with COVID, we haven't been able to get down there in person since 2019. But when we do, we have neighborhood meetings, and we've mentioned this on the air before, with up to 35 people, almost all of whom have seen Bigfoot and strange lights, sometimes in close proximity. Our good friend Ronnie LeBlanc from Leominster, Mass., who's on Expedition Bigfoot, is very has done a lot of research on the presence of these lights, particularly orange orbs, as he calls them. So, I mean, what it means, I don't know. When we saw that UFO and videoed the thing in 2019 in May, there had been a lot of Bigfoot sightings in the area. We're dealing, perhaps, if our theories are correct, with overwashes of various parallel worlds with different laws of physics, different inhabitants, perhaps, and intersect points, which may involve the lights, maybe orbs. I've expressed the opinion in the past that orbs, which are these balls of light that interestingly occur far more in digital photography than they did in the old days on standard film, might be living things that feed around the boundaries of parallel worlds. That's just a thought. So whatever they are, there do seem to be these lights, and if Bigfoot is indeed a shapeshifter, which can mean coming and going, not necessarily changing into a handsome prince when you kiss it right then and there, but you could have it coming and going across the membranes, and the lights may be just a phenomenon associated with that. But we really don't know. But there are a lot of reports of Bigfoot and UFOs. Now, the zaniest one I think I've ever heard was, 1976 in France. And it was late at night. It was winter. There was snow on the ground. And there was a couple out doing what couples do in parking out there. And they happened to see an orb descend from the sky, or a craft. And a Bigfoot gets out. And a couple of aliens, and then all this stuff that it just sounds like it's right out of a comic book.
It sounds like you're starting a joke. Bigfoot, an alien, and a ghost walk into a bar.
Yes. But there was a second witness who claimed at least saw the light at the time. So I don't know. Very, very bizarre. And so there do seem to be, at least in the folklore of the field, relationships between Bigfoot and UFOs. But whether Bigfoot is an alien or whatever, what do you mean by alien? These are all open questions. Peter, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, recently I was thinking about, I don't know, for some reason this popped into my mind, the idea of, humans have scarecrows to keep away animals from crops. So maybe extraterrestrials or whatever they are can generate their own version of a scarecrow, which has apparent reality, but would not be affected by gunshots, things like that, because we have instances where people are shooting at Bigfoot with no effect, and even shooting at Bigfoot, and Bigfoot disappears in a flash. And I'm thinking, could this be some kind of alien holographic technology where it appears to be real, but it's just some kind of a projection that has a scarecrow mission to scare people away from certain areas. I don't know. For some reason that popped into my mind. I don't know if it has any validity, but maybe there's a more advanced form of hologram that can have some minimal physical effects on the environment, but still not be real. In other words, because we have the footprints from Bigfoot, yet Bigfoot is impervious to bullets. We have those stories. So how do you explain that?
Yeah.
I don't know.
That is an interesting idea to kind of throw that out there. We were having lunch the other day with Alexander Pedikov, and we were talking about wood knocks and the various forms of communication that are used. And apparently, within the last few years, it was discovered that primates, apparently, they communicate. They can with other primates with claps, and also with these popping sounds that gorillas can do with their teeth. And it's interesting. And a part of me, if we're keeping up with this scenario, wonders if it's if it's an extraterrestrial's understanding of how humans communicate with each other. Almost, it's like a half human thing. Something that's just human enough that may be able to articulate behavior of other primates or something to that effect. I don't know. It's a fun scenario to kind of play around in, because it does kind of answer it sort of answers the question to why is it that they are there one second then gone the next, or how can they do like you said, semi physical things like impact the environment in some way, shape, or form, but yet there's no bodies found. There's no, you'll find hair samples every now and then, but it's like, they'll run out in front of cars, people shoot at them, and then nothing. It is an interesting idea.
Yeah, well, my own Bigfoot encounter in 2016 in Pennsylvania was anything but scary to me, but I always refer to that little girl who saw something very similar in broad daylight on her way home from school on the dirt road, and she's been terrified to this day. So I don't know. It's sort of an open question, and very good speculation, fellas, I have to say. So I think we have time for maybe one more in depth.
I think we do. Do you have another page?
Oh yes, right here. Yep.
If you can get it off the trick table, it's like a trick birthday candle.
Very bad surface.
Indeed. So, here's one for you, Dad. Probably closer to your neck of the woods. Carrie from Red Oak, Texas, writes to us. I've heard you guys say that you should not try to communicate with ghosts or other entities. But what happens if they try to communicate with you? Do you ignore them, or what? Even if they say, as Paul says, play Frisbee with your grandma's fine china.
Well, the general rule of thumb that I've always used after I learned the hard way about it in the 70s was that it's never a good idea to try to communicate with these things. I don't care if it's Ouija boards, mediums, or whatever. And having said that for years, there I am writing in my last book in 2019 that I'm sitting down meditating and communicating with these things that seem to approach me. That's why I didn't want to write about it. I sound like a hypocrite. But I think that there are degrees here. I think that if you, we always say, avoid, quote unquote, ghost hunting and avoid seeking it out. I told that to a whole room full of more than 200 would-be ghost hunters some years ago in Florida, and I got a blank stare in return. But I think that if these things come to you unbidden, or you live in a quote unquote haunted house, you're not seeking it out. It's like it's seeking you out. So, I mean, or at least you're in a situation where you're going to run into it. So I do sympathize with that. I think that it has to be taken with as much common sense as you can. And to avoid, I think, trying to ignore it or avoiding communication is important. Because you don't know what you're dealing with. However, there are times where it becomes impossible to ignore, or there are poltergeist things going on. In that case, who are you going to call? Well, I mean, there's really, I don't know, it's a real dilemma. I mean, you can call us, but I mean, we're here. We don't have it's not like we can jump on our Gulfstream and go jetting to the West Coast, help somebody out in BC or California. On the other hand, what do you do? I would say get in touch with us or some of our gang. And I think that our approach is it does work, and we can give advice. But I would not call in, the local ghost hunters. You don't know how qualified they are. I'm waiting for the lawsuits to begin with these people, and I wouldn't rely on TV or any of these reality shows because it's entertainment, not science. So it is a dilemma. But I would say ignore it if you can. If you can't, call us. I mean, that's all I could really think about.
Fair enough.
That situation. Peter?
Well, I'm not too sure how to respond to that. I would like to get a more specific example. Just like when you're dealing with humans, how humans approach you depends on, would affect the quality of your response. Yeah, I really. Now I do have. Do we have time for another question, or are we?
Well, I wanted to point out something that came in over Messenger just now. Charlie from Oregon, who's a very faithful listener, says, "Great thought about Bigfoot being a scarecrow. Truly unique. I like it. Good on you, Peter." Unquote.
Yeah, I mean, you, Paul, have experienced Bigfoot close encounter, so I don't know. This is just, for some reason, that just popped in my head, and it will explain how you could see this thing. It appears to be real, but it could take bullets without any effect. That, to me, that's totally mysterious, and yeah, I haven't developed this idea any further than that. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
There's always time.
Course, there's people that find the samples of hair. So how do you explain that? And the footprints. So maybe there's some higher level of hologram projection which can leave some physical effects, minimal. I don't know.
Well, one point I'd like to make is that whether it's me encountering the Bigfoot there in 2016 or people growing up in haunted houses or encountering aliens, whatever class of encounter it is, you encounter it doesn't mean you understand it any better. And you might get impressions and things, but you just, I don't know, it is a mystery. It's always a mystery.
Indeed.
Yeah. And I think the multiverse idea probably comes closest to explaining maybe how it works, but why it exists may not be so easy to answer.
Right.
So, Ben, any thoughts before we leave that question?
Sure. I guess It's I guess my answer could apply to both of those questions. Is, as I've been saying, which my saying for the day is, we work with the data we have, and one of the really interesting portions of being a human is how we experience knowledge of data of what we have. So we have data, right? I can say, X amount of people have seen Bigfoot, X amount of people have seen UFOs, X amount of people have had quote unquote communications with extraterrestrials or other entities or something, and it's like, okay, cool, we got numbers. But the problem is we need to interpret the data, and that's where we have the most trouble, is how do we interpret the data we have. And it's very hard to do because A, there's not a ton of it, and B, it's always up to how we experience it, right? You have the lovely experience of been working in the paranormal for a very large portion of your life. So you have a set of data that is very different than that of a 7-year-old girl who sees Bigfoot for the first time. So the amount of data that you have and the bullet points that you have are very different. So how you interpret the experience and interpret the data is very different. Our friend down in Red Oak, Texas, has the data of talking with something or something attempting to communicate with her, and the data she has is us, and how to interpret that, and it's sort of like we have the data that is, okay, well, Bigfoot can be shot at and appear to take no bullet wounds and disappear, but we also have data that there can be hair samples, there can be tracks and stuff that we see, and we have this data, and it's like, we have bits and pieces of a giant jigsaw puzzle, and we're told, all right, build the puzzle with like a quarter of the pieces you need to build it, and so you have to take these pieces and try and build something out of it. Yeah. Which there's not a really easy way to do it in a way that we can all kind of agree on, which is evident by how we all have very different opinions on the same thing.
Oh, sure.
So we work with the data we have, which is not much. And so the goal would be to get A, more data, but B, I think a secondary goal should be to develop some sort of discerning way in which to interpret the data, a way that is as objective as possible, a way that is to understand that there are subjective experiences of this data that are very different for everybody. So you can say, well, data's objective, and so we know that X, Y, and Z happened, but then how do we interpret it?
Yeah. Okay, well, that pretty much brings us to the end of today's discussion, and I think that's a subject we can approach again, Ben. So let's take away our announcements if we can here.
Indeed.
Actually, I'm up first. On Friday, September 17th, that's next Friday, at 7 p.m., I'll present a program on poltergeists via Zoom, sponsored by the Tewksbury Public Library in Tewksbury, Massachusetts. Find information and register at tewksburypl.org. Now, again, this is Zoom, so anybody, even if you live in Bogota, you can sign up for this and participate in it.
Indeed. And on Tuesday, September 21st, that's coming up fast, my dad will present a program on UFOs, cryptids, and ghosts via Zoom to Mainline MUFON in Philadelphia. And you can check out Mainline MUFON, MUFON.com.
I really appreciate not having to drive 4 hours to go to these things.
It's kind of the silver lining.
Yes, it is. There's nothing good about this pandemic, but I mean, it does save gas now and then, I must say. On Friday, October 8th, I'll present a paranormal overview at an unusual venue, the Arizona Dowsers Conference at the Little America Hotel in Flagstaff. That is in person, and you can visit dowserssouthwest.com for more information. And on Thursday, October 21st, at 7 p.m., I'll be back at the Haverhill Public Library in Haverhill, Mass. to present on Behind the Paranormal, Everything You Know is Wrong. This is scheduled to be an in-person event, but stay tuned on that. And for any of these things, Ben might join me if he's able, but, his being a working stiff now with a mortgage to pay, he's...
And also, I will be starting courses soon.
Yes.
So on that note, we'll present once again at the Western Connecticut UFO Conference during the last week of October this year. On Sunday the 24th, we'll do a live simulcast with the conference. This will be an open line show format with Kathleen Martin taking questions from conference participants and our global audience on the Betty and Barney Hill abduction case, which 2021 is actually the 60th anniversary. On the following Saturday, COVID variants permitting, we'll present live at the Danbury, Connecticut Public Library to help wrap up the conference. Other presenters that week will include Mark D'Antonio, Tom Reed, Michael Schratt, Linda Zimmerman, and Mike Panicello from Connecticut MUFON.
Okay, now, Peter, what's going on with you? Tell us about Shadowy Spectrums.
Well, yeah, my show on YouTube, I am behind schedule in developing new interviews, but hopefully in about a month approximately, I'll be interviewing somebody in Asia about UFOs.
Yeah, I like the approach of interviewing non-American experts. That's a very much untapped sort of a source.
Indeed.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, we're coming out of the end here. What do we have for next week, Ben?
Well, so next week, once I get to where it is, September 19th, we'll welcome Dr. Erica Elliott for a journey into what she's learned about medicine and miracles in the desert while living with the Navajo people. Huh,
I can't wait to hear your point of view because you were with the same Navajo people, not at the same time.
Well, no, and my experience was only for a week on a mission trip, so it was...
Well, it's more than my experience in that particular reservation anyway.
I guess that's a good point.
All right, well, we leave you today with a laconic thought from none other than Walt Disney, who appears to have known his multiverse theory. If you can dream it, you can do it. I'm Paul Eno.
And I'm Ben Eno.
And I'm Peter William Shelley. Thanks for joining us on our great cosmic journey, and we'll see you next time on Behind the Paranormal.